Welcome back, Wasteland Wanderers, to another deep dive with Wasteland Fatigue Weekly, brought to you by Fatigue Force. This week, we're turning our scanners towards the heart of the day, our survival community, those player conversations, the ones that capture the joys and the struggles of, wasteland living.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to see what your fellow survivors are up to, right? This week's chat logs are a real mix. We've got everything from heated debates to hilarious stories and even some surprisingly clever strategies.
So let's get right to it. Remember, In-1 Lou, the player who just got back to the game after a 2-year break. Let's just say their return wasn't exactly met with open arms.
More like rusty tools and a mountain of repairs to do.
Yeah, In-1 Lou was pretty disappointed to find out the Belly Z, that absolute unit of a vehicle got nerfed. It takes a ridiculous 20 real-life days and 20 hours just to craft one material for it.
Oh, wow. Talk about a harsh reality check.
But Mr. Subchenko tried to make light of the situation, joked that it's more realistic now. Even compared it to trying to drive a Belly Z across deep water, which, as we all know, is a recipe for disaster in the wasteland.
He's got a point, though. It does make you think about how much realism is too much in a game like Dayar. Does it actually make the game more challenging? Or just turn it into a never-ending grind?
I mean, at that rate, you're probably better off just walking. Speaking of tricky situations, remember Owly 1032 bragging about hitting 10,000 damage with her rifle and the Nobody Move perk?
Oh yeah, Daima Sheep chimed in with a sarcastic, "Ah yes, fair and balanced." Classic debate riot. How do you make a perk powerful enough to be fun and useful without completely breaking the game?
It's kind of like trying to take down a bear with a rusty spoon, not exactly a fair fight. And speaking of unfair, let's talk about the event shop. The hot topic this week, drop rates or the lack thereof.
Everyone seems to be having terrible luck. Ricka5 even shared a screenshot of pulling a duplicate snow globe on their 70th pull. You'd think after that many tries they'd at least get something unique.
Seriously, you'd think those percentages would work in your favor eventually. But Incharname even questioned whether the system is rigged. It does feel like those rare items are about as common as seeing a unicorn in the wasteland.
It's a tough balance with these gacha mechanics. You want that thrill of the chase, but when it feels impossible to get the good stuff, it just turns into frustration. Makes you wonder why we keep coming back for more, doesn't it?
Speaking of coming back, remember Inchername's big plans to get all the helpers? Yeah, those plans went out the window faster than a can of expired beans when they saw the combined cost.
Their reaction, pure sticker shock. They pretty much gave up on the whole helper idea right then and there.
And then there was Night 21 Win, with their mysterious, "don't remember its price for me" comment. Makes you wonder what kind of expensive in-game purchases they've made in the past. It does make you think about the line between free-to-play and pay-to-win, right? Where do you draw the line, and how much does it affect your enjoyment of the game?
It's a question every survivor has to face at some point. But hey, at least we can all complain about it together. Speaking of being together, let's head over to the bustling digital metropolis of Tula, where things are getting a little well crowded.
Yeah, Incharname and Ricky5 were talking about that weird phenomenon of being in a packed location, but not actually seeing anyone. It's like a ghost town full of invisible traders.
Rika5 even shared a story about finishing a trade in Tula without ever laying eyes on the other player. Makes you wonder if those player limits and server lag are creating some kind of digital phantom zone. Or maybe everyone's just too busy hoarding resources to stop and chat.
It wouldn't be a proper Dayar community deep dive without those quirky, head-scratching moments that make you laugh and wonder what's going on in people's minds. This week's highlight, someone genuinely asking if they could make whiskey from cereal at home.
Talk about wasteland ingenuity, and it doesn't stop there. We also had a passionate debate about whether cognac is a type of moonshine. I guess even in the apocalypse, people need something to argue about besides who gets the last can of irradiated peaches.
And of course, no week would be complete without the classic "I got banned for no reason" complaint. It never gets old, does it?
It's like a rite of passage for every Dayar player. Makes you wonder what kind of mischief they were up to.
But it's actually really interesting. We saw some insightful discussions about gameplay mechanics and strategies this week. For example, there was a whole thread about the best way to reload those flashlights and gas masks.
Turns out Incharname has a pretty clever trick. Make a bunch of duplicate flashlights so you don't have to waste precious time reloading when one runs out. Simple but effective.
It's like having a spare tire for your flashlight.
It just goes to show that sometimes the best strategies are the ones that use those unexpected resources. It's all about planning and resource management in this wasteland.
Couldn't agree more. Every decision matters. Now remember AC Bensi Tekkensi, the player who was convinced they'd been banned unjustly.
They actually asked other players to try and message them in-game to see if they were really banned.
Talk about using the power of the community. It's a reminder that even in the Wasteland, there's strength in numbers. The Christmas event was a hot topic this week. Some players were celebrating their good fortune, pulling rare and powerful items from the event shop. Others, not so much.
Let's just say there were a lot of screenshots of duplicate items, and it's a win-win situation. It helps the crafter level up and earn some valuable resources, and the buyer gets the items they need without waiting. It's a great example of how the community can come together and support each other.
And speaking of support, let's give a shout out to Loving Playgamer 124, who just finished the main story. They also brought up a really important point, how tough it is for new players to get their bearings in this unforgiven world.
They even talked about creating a new account just to experience the game from a newbie's perspective again. Makes you appreciate how much you've learned and adapted over time.
It does. It's like looking back at your old tattered survivor's journal and realizing how far you've come. What stood out to you from this week's chat?
Honestly, that whole discussion about the Belly Z nerf really got me thinking. It's not just about a vehicle, it's about the balance between realism and fun. It's a question that resonates with players across so many genres, and it's definitely something we'll be keeping an eye on.
I'm right there with you. It's a fascinating debate. But you know what else is fascinating? The sheer ingenuity of the DAR community. From using turrets as bullet sponges to finding creative ways to farm resources, these players are constantly finding ways to overcome challenges and thrive in the Wasteland. It's really inspiring.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that even in the most desolate and unforgiving environments, human ingenuity and the power of community can prevail.
Well said. So what else is cooking in the DAR Wasteland this week?
There were tons of conversations about inventory management, figuring out which items are worth selling in settlements, and even how to maximize those weekly cap rewards.
And we stumbled upon a pretty deep discussion about the impact of timers on gameplay.
Intername called it fake longevity, arguing that those timers artificially extend the game by preventing players from progressing too quickly. They even pointed out the irony of the game's timers being tied to your device, meaning you could theoretically manipulate them if you were so inclined.
But Night Deer A1 countered with a playful, "What's the point of timers anyway?" It's a lighthearted exchange, but it touches on some deeper questions about game design and player agency.
Exactly. And it just shows how diverse the DAR community is. You've got players who love the strategic challenge of timers and those who see them as an annoying roadblock.
That's what makes it so interesting, right? There's no one right way to play.
Absolutely. And that diversity of opinions is what keeps the conversations lively.
We also saw some debates about the best vehicles, with the Volga getting some love for its speed and fuel efficiency.
And of course, no week would be complete without a discussion about those controversial cursed coins. Are they still worth the risk? The jury's still out on that one.
Speaking of risk versus reward-loving, Playgamer124 was surprised to discover that you can actually sell stew meat in settlements. Who knew?
Well, Daima Sheep quickly advised against it. Turns out fat is a valuable commodity in the Wasteland economy.
Makes sense. Got to keep those energy levels up. And speaking of energy, there's a fascinating discussion about the best way to obtain cement after that recent update. Apparently, selling scrap metal to business class is no longer a viable option.
Right. Mary Sescu was particularly perplexed by this change, but other players chimed in with some helpful alternative strategies.
It's amazing how quickly the community adapts to those curveballs, isn't it?
It is. It's a testament to their resilience and willingness to help each other out.
So are you ready for more Wasteland wisdom?
Always. Let's keep diving into the heart of the day, our community. This week, we saw a player struggling with that evil coal puzzle in the winter location. You know, the one.
Oh yeah, that puzzle's a real pain. Even experienced players can get stuck on it.
Right. Well, this player was trying to clear the coals with vacuum bombs, but the wall layout was making it a real headache.
Makes sense, vacuum bombs are powerful, but they can be unpredictable.
Yeah. Luckily, Medic 7962 had a helpful tip. They suggested using a gift to boost damage output if the player's weapons weren't strong enough to destroy the coals in one shot.
So basically, use a gift to give yourself a little firepower boost. I like it. It's always good to think outside the box.
Exactly. And sometimes those event items can really save the day. Speaking of saviors, remember those pricey helpers that got everyone riled up? Well, we had a new player, Bantom6145, who was a little confused about how they actually work.
Yeah, it can be tough for new players to figure out all the mechanics.
Right. They were wondering if the joy the helpers generate actually stacks, and if the helpers are permanent once you get them. Thankfully, the veteran players chimed in to clear things up.
So the Wasteland Welcome Wagon came to the rescue. What did they say?
They explain that while the helpers are forever, the joy they provide only stacks during the event. After the event's over, you gotta give your helpers specific items to keep that joy coming.
So it's like a long-term investment with some maintenance required. Makes sense, I guess. It wouldn't be the Wasteland if things were too easy.
Definitely gotta keep things challenging. But it also encourages players to engage with the event and the core gameplay. Speaking of the good old days, we saw some players reminiscing about a time when certain items were easier to get.
Nostalgia. It's a powerful thing. What were they missing?
Philly 2005 was talking about the days when craft in a Volga was a piece of cake and they could use it to zoom around and finish missions. They weren't too happy about the changes that have made some vehicles like the poor Belle Z less useful.
It's like that favorite pair of boots you wore till they fell apart.
Yeah.
You can never really replace them.
Exactly. Games are always changing, and a strategy that used to be great can become outdated.
Adapt or die, right?
Right.
That's the Wasteland motto.
Yep. Speaking of adapting, there was a lot of talk about the best ways to farm joy during the event. Some players were all about crafting specific food items, while others were grinding those ice blocks and fortresses.
It's like choosing your weapon in a survival horror movie, chainsaw or shotgun. It all depends on your style.
And let's not forget the players who prefer a more collaborative approach. We saw a lot of them hitting up the in-game comms channels asking for XP jobs and offering to craft items for a fee.
The barter system. The foundation of any good post-apocalyptic economy.
Absolutely. It shows how the DAR community works together and helps each other out. Now let's switch gears and talk weapons. There were some heated debates about the best firearms to have in your survival kit.
Yes, the classic question. What's the best way to take down a radioactive boar?
Well, Avenger Drift was praising the handmade rifle and pistol, but Psychotherapist 6730 had a different opinion. They argued that the musket was better.
Musket versus rifle. It's a tough choice. But in the end, it comes down to personal preference and playstyle.
Absolutely. What works for one player might not work for another. There's no one right answer when it comes to Wasteland combat.
You gotta find what feels right for you. We also saw some really interesting discussions about specific weapon mechanics, like the M1's ricochet ability.
Oh yeah. Diamond Sheep noticed that the ricochet seems to have infinite range, or at least a range greater than 7 based on their experience in the 9x9 battle map.
Infinite ricochet.
Yeah.
That's a scary thought. Imagine the mayhem.
Right. It just goes to show that even the smallest details in game mechanics can have a huge impact on the gameplay experience. Speaking of details, remember Oops Boom and their quest for the Desert Eagle?
Oh yeah, they were really determined to get that gun.
Well, they discovered that you can only get it with caps, that premium currency.
Caps. The currency of choice on the Wasteland black market.
Exactly. And this sparked a bigger discussion about how players are getting and spending those caps. Some rely on weekly rewards and events, while others are, well, let's just say more entrepreneurial.
Let's just say some survivors are more flexible with the rules.
Right. Avenger Drift even hinted at a whole underground market where players trade valuable items like fatty meat for caps. It's a whole other level of Wasteland economics.
It's amazing how these informal economies pop up in online games. Supply and demand in action. But speaking of risky business, remember the player who was worried about getting banned for downloading an older version of the game to play single player?
Oh yeah, they got a mysterious "we can't even talk about it" response from Incharname. Seems like that's a bit of a taboo topic in the community.
Probably don't want to attract attention from the devs. Even in the Wasteland, there are lines you don't cross.
Remember N1 Luler and their hopes for the Belle Z?
Oh yeah, they were really hoping to use that vehicle, but other players quickly burst their bubble.
It's like showing up to a party in a limo, only to find out the party's in a tiny basement.
Right. And Mr. Savchenko chimed in with his usual humor, joking that the Belle Z is more realistic now because it's like trying to drive it through water. I can just picture it. A Belle Z stuck in a puddle warranty, voided.
It's a funny image, but it also points to that tension between realism and fun in game design.
It's a tricky thing to get right. You want the game to feel real, but you don't want it to be a chore to play.
Definitely. And the developers are still trying to find that balance.
And the players are right there with them, giving feedback, sharing their experiences, and helping to shape the game.
It's a real collaboration. We're all in this wasteland together.
That's right. And that shared experience with all its highs and lows is what makes the DAR community so special.
We're about halfway through this deep dive into the DAR community. Ready for more wasteland wisdom?
Absolutely. Let's keep exploring the conversations that are shaping this world.
So we were talking about the Belle Z and its, not so great performance these days. We had a player AB5 tracked wondering about the cost of running this nuclear-powered beast. They figured since it runs on nukes, there wouldn't be any expenses.
Yeah, fuel costs aren't really a thing when you're Harnessing the power of the atom, right?
Well, not quite in charting. Reminded everyone that durability is still a factor. And those repairs can add up, especially if you have to rely on specialists. They even mentioned their Belly Z was costing a hefty 333 nuts per 100 kilometers thanks to the Motor Costs 5 perk.
Wow, that's a lot. Makes you think twice about those long wasteland road trips.
Right. But on a more positive note, Feely 2005 shared a nice story about using their Belly Z to help new players build houses and set up greenhouses.
Oh, that's awesome. Even in the apocalypse, there's still kindness and community.
It's those little things that make the wasteland a little less bleak, right? Now let's talk about something that sparked some real debate this week. The effectiveness of certain perks. Specifically, the Nobody Move perk.
The one that turns you into a wasteland sniper? I could see why that would be a hot topic.
Definitely Parawaxer commented that if they had the Nobody Move perk, that sniper rifle from the first event chest would have been amazing for taking down those tough mobs.
Makes sense. The right perk can change everything in a fight.
Absolutely. And Ricka5 chimed in saying they actually have the perk and are trying to get that sniper rifle. They even talked about how frustrated they were not getting a single orange item after 70 pulls on the event shop.
70 pulls. Ouch. That's some serious bad luck. No wonder they're feeling a little down.
It's tough when you put so much effort into an event and the drop rates just don't cooperate. It reminds you that sometimes even with the best strategy and a little luck, those RNG gods just aren't on your side.
Speaking of things not being on your side, remember those conversations about the limitations of online gameplay, especially in crowded spots like Tula?
Ah, yes, the digital ghost town where you trade with invisible players.
Exactly. Well, Ricka5 shared a story about completing a trade in Tula without ever actually seeing the other player. They even wondered if it was because of player limits or server lag, which just adds to the whole weirdness of it.
It's like trading with a ghost through a glitching screen. It's definitely a unique experience.
Makes you wonder about all those unseen interactions happening in the wasteland. All right, let's shift gears for a minute and focus on those classic DAR moments. You know, the player mishaps and funny observations that make you laugh and wonder what's going on.
We had plenty of those this week. First up, we had Avenger Drift accidentally eaten raw fatback.
Uh-oh, rookie mistake.
Maybe. Or maybe just a moment of desperation. Either way, let's just say they weren't feeling too great afterwards.
Always good to double check before you eat anything in the wasteland.
Yeah.
You never know what you might be getting yourself into.
Exactly. And then we had a player asking if insomnia effects were still in the game.
Sounds like someone's looking to experience all the wasteland has to offer.
Maybe they just need a strong cup of wasteland coffee. And speaking of things that keep you up at night, there were some lively discussions about the best items to sell in settlements.
It's all about making those caps and keeping your inventory organized right.
Definitely. Players were weighing in on the pros and cons of selling everything from scrap metal and stew meat to refrigerators.
Refrigerators. That's an interesting one. I wonder who's buying those in the wasteland.
Right. Maybe someone's trying to build the ultimate post-apocalyptic bachelor pad. So what did we learn from this week's deep dive into the DAR community?
For me, it's a reminder that games aren't just about having fun. They're about connecting with people, sharing experiences, and building communities.
I agree. The DAR community is a perfect example of that. They're resilient, they're creative, and they always help each other out through thick and thin.
And they manage to find humor and camaraderie along the way. It's pretty inspiring.
It is. It shows that even in the harshest environments, the human spirit can thrive. So on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of Wasteland Fatigue Weekly.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of the DAR community.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep surviving, and keep those conversations going.